Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Aquarium Online Academy. My name is Ty from the Aquarium of the Pacific, and I'm here joining you this morning for today's exploration of a really amazing ocean habitat, the coral reef. Now, along our journey today, I would love if you would like to participate along with us. So below here, we're going to have a number that you can use to text in live at 562-286-1838. You are also welcome to use the email down below at live@lbaop.org. You're also welcome to use that if you're watching this after we're live and you come up with some questions. We'll be sure to get back to you to make sure we answer anything that you are interested in. So feel free to use that number or email down below. I have my friend Jen behind the camera who will be able to pass along those questions to me, and she'll also be working all the magic that you see back here. All right, my friends. So like I said, what we're going to do today is we are going to explore a really amazing ocean habitat, the coral reef. Now, maybe you've heard the word habitat before. Now, habitats, just like on land, right? You might think of some habitats, some might come to your mind, but that word really just means the home of the animals, right? And so on land, we have tons of habitats. We have the rainforests, the deserts, the Arctic. We even have urban environments like big cities for humans, right? That's our habitat in some places. And so because of that, underwater, you'll also have lots of different habitats where different animals call it home. Now, the reason I bring up that city, like a city on land that people live in, right? Lots of humans will live in these big cities working together. And that is very similar to a coral reef because coral reefs are almost like the cities underwater. There's a lot of life there. Tons of animals call it home. And each of them have a different role and in many cases work together in order to keep these coral reefs, these underwater cities, nice and healthy. So along our journey today, we're also going to do a little bit of drawing if you'd like. So I'm going to go over to my camera really quick and show you what I've brought. And so you can gather your things if you would like to draw with me. Now, you do not have to draw with me if you don't want to. Feel free, you don't have to. But it'll be really simple today if you do want to join along with us. All you need is some paper and something to color with. So it could be any sort of type. I might use colored pencils today or some markers. But you're also welcome if you would like to use some crayons or something else, feel free. But that's all you need, something to color and draw with, and then also just a piece of paper. And if you want to use like blue paper or something for your water instead, you can do that too. So we'll do that as we explore some animals along the way, and then you can feel free to add to it afterwards. But that's what we'll be doing today. So I'm going to go ahead, and the way we're going to start is just by making some observations. So as scientists, and all of you joining us today are indeed scientists with me, because to be a scientist, it just means to be curious about the world around you and to use your senses to explore the world. So for today, we're going to be using our sight to see what we can find in all the cool videos and pictures behind me. So go ahead and take a second, and I want you to just make some observations about the coral reef. I'll step off for just a second. Go ahead and think about what do you notice, and you're welcome to, if you want to text your observations, and you can, or if you're just watching with somebody, feel free to share along with them. So go ahead, make some observations. What are some things you notice about the coral reef? Now, as I'm watching, there are definitely some things that stand out to me. Well, one is that we call this habitat a coral reef, and I see lots of coral. So do you see lots of coral too? I'll give you some hints. There's some here and here and here. Just about everywhere there are some corals in here. So we'll talk about those first. But what else? What else do you notice beyond the corals themselves? What about the animals? Yeah, so I'm definitely seeing lots of colors of all these different kinds of fish that are swimming around, right? Lots of bright and beautiful colors, and that's one of the really amazing things about coral reefs. There's so much color, right? That's why we call our program the Colorful Coral Reefs, and that's why they're so fun to draw too. All right, so first, let's go ahead and talk about those corals. Now, what is coral? Well, let's look. Take a close look. Are they moving and swimming around? Not really. They look they're kind of stuck in place. I definitely see some different colors, but they don't look like they're really doing much. So what are they? Are they just colorful rocks that you find in the ocean? Or are they like plants maybe? Maybe they're just like, like the trees underwater maybe, right? They're alive, but they don't move. Maybe they're like that. But actually, corals are animals. That's pretty weird, right? You won't think that these things that look like these cool little structures, these rock structures, these sculptures almost underwater, are living animals, but they are. So corals are related to animals like jellies and sea anemones. And as you can see here, these are a lot more different kinds of corals. They come in different shapes, different sizes, different colors, right? There's lots of different kinds. But corals share some things and some importance in the coral reef because, well, they are the habitat, right? So there are lots of these, rocks and reefs that these corals grow on. But something that's really interesting is that some of this actual reef itself is made up of the skeletons of old corals that have lived and died for hundreds of years. So even after a coral stops living, its body still becomes part of the reef for new corals to then grow on top of. This is a great look at some other types of corals here. Here's a great close-up, right? And so as these corals grow on the reef, they build the habitat. So there's lots of little animals that like to live in and around the coral reefs. Can you think of any reasons why? Why would the fish or all these other animals like to live around coral reefs? Why might they be important? Share that with someone with you, or feel free to share that with us. Because you can see here, there's going to be lots of little fish swimming in and out of these corals. Well, some things that maybe you thought of could be to hide, right? As part of your home, it's your shelter. And so in this case, lots of small coral reef fish like to hide in and around the corals. But also, it could be food. And we'll talk about food in a second of an animal that loves to eat corals, right? And then, like I said, that even after the corals have stopped living, their skeleton becomes part of the reef to continue life going on these reefs. So I actually want to show you some of that really quick because I've brought over some real coral skeletons so you can see what I mean. And also, we're going to take a close look so you can see also what I mean when I say that corals are indeed animals. So I've brought a couple different types here for you to check out, and then we'll add these into our drawing. But as you can see, there's not much color for these ones, right? And that's because all we're looking at here is the skeleton of the coral itself. But what are some things that you notice about these? Let me add one more. Do you notice anything interesting about these different corals? Maybe you're noticing that there's different shapes, right? We kind of saw that in those corals on the reef. Definitely different shapes. Now, I said that these things are animals, right? But it's kind of hard to tell when they're, just living out on the coral reef. They look like these big, colorful sculptures. But when you look at their skeleton, you can really start to see where the actual animals live in these. So if I zoom in here, you will see, you notice all these circles, these almost holes all over? Well, each one of these holes, you can almost think of them like the coral structure is like an apartment complex. And each one of these little holes is a house for an individual, what we call coral polyp. And so if we take a look here, you can see when the coral's alive, you have all of these individual polyps, these tiny animals here. Now, if you look closely, do they remind you of any other animals? I mentioned a little bit earlier who are sort of the cousins of the corals. Maybe you've heard of sea anemones before, where Nemo lives, like this one here. Do you see any similarities? And also even jellies too. So they're sort of the cousins to jellies because if you look at them, they also have these tentacles. So if we go back to the coral, you'll see these tentacles when they're alive, right? All of these waving in the water, right? So these tentacles, any ideas what they might do? You can even think of those other animals, the anemones and the jellies. Any ideas what they will use those tentacles to do? What will they help them with when they're surviving out on the reef? Well, if you've thought of maybe, especially if you've heard of jellies before, you know that they sting, right? So corals also have stinging tentacles that they can use to catch food. They catch little bits of tiny floating plankton and other small critters that float around. But that's only one way that they get their energy. In fact, there's a really cool trick up the coral's sleeve that they use to get some of their energy too. And maybe we can take a close look. Because I mentioned the coral reef is sort of like a city where there's animals that are working together. And in this case, the coral is actually sort of like two organisms together working to help each other, right? So in this case, what we're doing is we're looking really close on one of those coral polyps. You can even see the little tentacles. But what do you notice about this close-up? Do you see anything else? think of the colors that we were looking at, right? We saw lots of different colors in our corals. Look here, and you can see, do you see all this sort of yellow, greenish all through the coral? Now, what this is a special type of algae called zooxanthellae. And that's kind of a big fancy word, but zooxanthellae is sort of like the coral's best friend because, like I said, they work together. The coral provides a house for the zooxanthellae. As you can see, it's living right here in the tissue of the coral. But zooxanthellae it works almost like a plant, where plants are using light to make energy. Zooxanthellae is doing the same thing, and it gives some of that energy back to the coral. So in corals themselves, there's actually two things working together, which is really cool. All right, so let's go ahead and start our drawing by adding some corals. I'll have my friend Jen go through a couple different types of corals so you can refresh on some of the different shapes and colors of some corals, and then we'll go ahead and add some in. So let's take a look and see. Like I said, there are so many different kinds, so feel free to change colors and things as you'd like. But even just here, take a look. There's so many. Some look like they're almost little branches, kind of like what we saw earlier with my skeleton I brought. There are these that almost look like, I believe it's called cauliflower coral, right? So they look kind of like cauliflower. There's some that grow like plates, almost flat. And then there's some like we saw in that picture earlier that even though they might still have a skeleton, they are soft and they wave in the water. So there's tons and tons of different kinds. So as we go through, take a look and see which ones you might want to add into yours, and then I'll show you mine. Ooh, also, Jen, if you could you show us a brain coral too? Those are one of my favorites to add into the drawings. Now, I'm going to have Jen show you a really cool coral. I called it the brain coral, and when you see it, hopefully you'll be able to see exactly how it got its name, because the brain coral is super, super cool. And as we're looking here, there it is. Check that out. You can see why it gets its name, right? The brain coral. So why don't we start with this one, and then we'll add in some others too. So if we go to my drawing, the way I'm going to start, and again, you don't have to do it exactly like mine. Feel free to change it how you'd like. But for me, I'm going to start by drawing the reef, right? That sort of rocky structure that we see here, where our corals are going to start to live, right? So I'm just going to draw sort of like there's two sides to the reef. And then feel free to start adding in your corals. So I'm going to do a brain coral first. Now, the way I like to draw my brain coral is by just drawing a circle, and then inside that circle, drawing a bunch of squiggly lines to almost give it that look of the brain like we saw earlier. Brain corals are super cool. There's lots of little fish that like to hide in and around the brain corals. So I'm going to draw one there. And like I said, corals come in all different colors, so feel free to change their colors how you like. I'm going to do a green brain coral. Why not? So I'll do one over here on this side. Like I said, these ones are some of my favorite. I am not the best artist, so I will do my best. But we would love for you to join along if you'd like. And after the program, you're also welcome to use that text line to send us your creations. We would love to see them. Now, there are lots of other corals that we can add in too. So again, feel free to choose some different colors. I'm going to add in some branching corals. Oh, take a look here. Look at all the different kinds of course, colorful fish we're going to get to next. And all along the bottom, you can really start to see all the different kinds of corals, right? There's bright greens and pinks, so many different kinds, right? So I'll add a couple more, and then we'll start to get to some of those cool fish we're looking at. So in my drawing, I'm going to add some branching corals, which is really easy. You just have to kind of draw some lines like they're branching off from each other. Draw one right here. Draw some branching corals. And like I said, feel free to add on any more if you would like. There's so many different kinds, so feel free. We'll add one more branching coral down here in a different color. Why not? All right. So again, if you're not done, if you're still drawing your corals, that's okay. Feel free to keep drawing in as many or as few as you would like. But now that we have some corals on our reef, let's talk about some of those animals. So I mentioned earlier that coral is really important because one, it builds the home, but it is food for some types of animals. And so I want to show you a really cool fish that loves to eat coral. So let's see if we can find what that fish is, and then we'll also add it to our drawing. So think about corals. Oh, check this guy out. Think about corals, right? I showed you their skeletons a little bit earlier, and if you were to feel these, you'll see they're really tough. They're like rocks, basically, right? So at first, it can be difficult to think about what is going to eat something that is as strong as a rock. Well, that's where you meet this amazing fish right here. Now, this fish is called the parrotfish. Parrot, like a bird. Why would we name a fish after a bird? Any ideas? Any guesses why you think we named this fish the parrotfish? Well, think about what birds share in common. What some things that they have, right? And maybe this picture gives you another hint. Well, birds have beaks, right? Different kinds to eat different kinds of food. And parrotfish have a special kind of beak themselves in order to chomp on those corals. So these parrotfish, they swim all around these coral reefs, and they use those really strong teeth to munch on these different pieces of coral and other algae too. Now, something that's kind of silly about these parrotfish is, well, when they eat the corals, they're only trying to digest the actual animals, right? We looked up close at some of those coral polyps, the animals that live in that skeleton that they build, right? But they can't actually eat all of that tough skeleton that's like a rock, right? Even though they're tough, they can break it down with these strong teeth. They can't actually digest all that. So something that's kind of silly about parrotfish is, after they eat all this coral, and they munched it down and they've digested the coral that they want, well, they actually end up pooping sand. I know. That's kind of silly, but it's true. As that skeleton breaks down, some of this, actually a lot of this white sand that you find on some of these coral reef beaches come from parrotfish poop. There's your new fun fact of the day. So, parrotfish are really cool because as they eat corals, they're actually opening up new spots, and as they eat algae, they're scraping that off of the rocks to allow new spaces for new corals to keep growing, right? Sort of like the gardeners of the coral reef. So, take a look at this picture here, and then we will try and add it in to our coral reef as well. So, as we do this, we will see if we can draw our parrotfish. I'll show you how I do it, and then feel free to add any changes that you'd like, because if you saw in those pictures too, they too come in separate colors as well. So for a parrotfish, the way I like to draw them is sort of like, I guess sort of like a football. Oh, well, we're going to try a different color because I just broke that one. Let's try a dark blue. So it's sort of like a football shape, like this. And then you'll see their tail. Their tails are also a little bit different too, depending on what kind it is. But normally, and like one we were looking at, it sort of has like 2 points like that. And then we're going to draw its face coming down here. We've got to give it its mouth where its beak is, so it can munch on all those coral. Give it an eyeball there. So it's sort of like a long fish, sort of like a stretched out football, I guess. And then we're going to need its fins. So for lots of these parrotfish, their top fin, it looks like it's just one really long one. There are two that's sort of connected, but it gives this appearance of like one really long one. And they have one on the bottom here that we'll add in. Got to give it its one on the side. They use these ones a lot to help stabilize themselves as they're going around the coral reef. Now, like I said, one of the fun parts of parrotfish is they come in so many different colors. And so it's really up to you to decide what colors you want to add in. I'm going to do, let's add some pink. And we'll do like a different kind of blue too. Now, something that you can do, if you'd like, check this one out. That parrotfish was bright yellow too. So if you want to make one like that, feel free. One thing you can do that I like to do is, because a lot of these parrotfish have pretty big like scales that you can see, I'll do like a little bit of like a cross, like lines going across, and that sort of creates like those diamond shaped sort of scales on this body. So feel free if you would like to do that. And then I'm going to shade in my parrotfish here. Look at that. So there is my little parrotfish. If you want to draw yours, maybe munching on some coral, feel free. You are welcome to do that too. All right. So now that we've added in our parrotfish, let's see what other animals we can explore. Now, like I said, since we only have a little bit of time today, we're really only scratching the surface of all the different animals that live on the coral reef, right? There's so many. But there is a really adorable fish that I would like to introduce you to next. And it's a little yellow fish that we call the cowfish. So let's see if we can show this adorable fish. It's one that I hold very near and dear to my heart because I just think that they're so cute. So we'll introduce you to the cowfish, talk about how they survive on the coral reef, and then we'll add it into our drawing. So we're gonna see if we can find that adorable little fish, and hopefully we'll be able to add him into our reef as well. So take a look here. All right, take a look. What are some things you notice about this fish here, the cowfish? Take a second to make some observations. Feel free to use that text line if you would like, or you can also just share with some people next to you. All right, so as you're making some observations about the cowfish, I heard from Jen that there were some questions coming in, so we'll try and get to those here in just a second. We did see that there was one question about, are anemones corals? Because I made that comparison earlier. I said corals are sort of like cousins to the anemones, and that's a great observation. Now, anemones are different animals than corals, but they have a lot in common. So when we were looking at those little individual corals, the ones that live in each one of these little holes in this case, those we call an individual polyp. Now, when it comes to anemones, we actually call them polyps too. So there are many anemones that live alone that are much bigger, and so we call those a polyp too. So different animals, but they share a lot of the same structures, and we even call the same name. If it's an individual anemone, we call a polyp too, which is very cool. We also looks like we have a question from Niles, and that was a little bit earlier on, and so we may have actually already answered your question. I'm sorry we got to it a little bit later, but Niles was asking if fish eat coral, and as you can see by our awesome parrotfish, the answer is yes. So there are not many things that eat coral. Usually that tough structure and also their stinging tentacles keep them safe from most things, but parrotfish are a great example of something that eat them. There are also some sea turtles that have been known to munch on some corals every now and then. And then you also have some other interesting animals, like there are some sea stars too. One that comes to mind is the crown of thorns sea star or the chocolate chip sea star. That is a real sea star. They're really cool. But those sea stars are also known for eating corals too. So there are some animals that can. Not a lot. They usually need a special way of eating them, but there are some. All right, so let's look at our little adorable cowfish. Hopefully you had some time to make some observations, but what are some things you see about this really cool little fish? Now I say little, it looks big on this picture, but cowfish are usually pretty tiny. But did you notice, what about its body shape? Did you notice anything interesting about that? It's much different than many other fish, including some that you see in the back. Their body's almost like a box. It's very square, and even when we look at some different angles too, and we'll show you some other pictures, they really do have a very box-shaped body. Okay, what about its colors? What did you see on colors? In that case, you may have seen that the cowfish is a bright yellow, right? Now, something that we mentioned earlier is that coral reefs are really colorful. But you might think, if you were a fish and you're bright colored, you're bright yellow, isn't that going to make it really easy for a predator to see you? Well, remember the habitat, right? A lot of these animals have specific adaptations or things on their body to survive, in this case, the coral reef. And so if your coral reef is really colorful, it actually helps you to be very colorful as well. And look at this adorable picture of the cowfish here, right? You can see it's looking straight on, and now you can really see its body is sort of like a box, right? So cowfish are really cute, like I've mentioned a couple times now. And the way that they swim is they use their fins on the side and on their back to almost like hover. So they're not maybe the fastest swimmers by any means, but they're really good at being able to sort of hover around the reef, because when they need to hide, right, there's all these little nooks and crannies in the corals for them to find a spot to live. Now, they also are going to be good at eating little things. They might be munching on tiny little critters they find on the coral reef, right? They can almost like slurp them up too. Now, we have a cowfish at the aquarium. He's one of my favorite fish to meet. Those are some of the pictures that you've been seeing. And this cowfish, when he gets fed, they can slurp up little squid, and you can see here they have that adorable little mouth to slurp up their food. All right, so let's go ahead and add in our cowfish. So I'll leave that picture up here for just a second so you can make sure you got a good image of the cowfish, and then we will add it into our drawing here. So, as mentioned, its body is truly like a square. So I'm going to go ahead and just draw basically a square almost. Oh, that might be too hard to see. Let me switch colors. So even though that cowfish was yellow, I'm going to go slightly, let's try this orange to see. Maybe if this one will show up a little bit better. So I'm going to do an orange color. Right, it sort of has a box shape. It's got its little mouth on the bottom. And then, if we go back to the picture real quick, what are some other things that some things that may have stood out to you near the front of the cowfish? Did you catch that? They have these two little, almost little points that stick out from their head. So I'm going to draw our little cowfish. Now they almost have like a fan tail, like it can sort of expand and retract as they need. So I'll draw it sort of like this. This is its little tail here. Draw its body up. They have their adorable big eyes towards the top. And then we'll draw those 2 points up on its head like that. It's got its fins here to help it swim around. Got to give it its side fin to help it glide around the coral reef, right? I drew mine pretty big, but if you want to adjust yours, feel free. So that is my attempt at a little cowfish. I've never tried to actually draw this one on the spot before. So there you go. There is our adorable cowfish. So we have just a couple minutes left, so feel free to add on your cowfish. And before we go, I want to share a video with you because I've been talking a little bit about how on the coral reef there are things that work together. So we saw that the coral and the zooxanthellae work together. The parrotfish has its role by opening new space, but there are animals too that work together in a completely different way that's quite unusual that we have a video that I'd like to share with you. So I'll have my friend Jen pull it up and take a look here. Any guesses what is possibly going on in this video? Well, there's this big fish kind of hanging out sideways, but what are these doing? Any ideas? It looks like maybe they're almost biting the fish, but the fish is kind of sitting there, so that's kind of strange, right? Well, what you're seeing here is a really cool interaction between these two fish, where this big fish is actually getting cleaned by the little fish. So these little tiny fish we call cleaner wrasses, and their whole job is to swim around the reef, and they basically set up almost like setting up a little car wash. And then these fish will swim on through, and then they'll use, you can see they have little tiny mouths, to actually pick off if there's any sort of loose scales or if there's any like parasites or annoying critters, they can get them off. And so this is really cool because it's a win-win for both animals. Like I said, there are some really cool interactions on the coral reefs that help both parties. We saw that in the coral and zooxanthellae, and you're seeing it here with the coral reef cleaning station. So as the little cleaner fish are nipping all those maybe little parasites or scales, they're actually getting their lunch, right? So they get a meal out of it. And then this big fish wins by getting cleaned and maybe getting off some of those pesky things off of its body. So it is a win-win. All right, my friends. So as we go ahead and wrap up, I wanted to share that last one with you, but I also wanted to give a shout out to Miss Salazar's class, who I heard is joining us today, and we are so glad to have you, and we hope you continue to join us. So glad to see you back here again. Now, we did our drawing today, but if you would like to continue building or adding onto it, please do so. There are so many more coral reef animals to explore. We only had time to see a little, so if you'd like to keep doing that, I encourage you. And if you would like to share your creation with us once you're all done, I'll have Jen throw up that number one more time in case you would like to text us in or use that email to send us your creation. So thank you so much for joining us today. I had a wonderful time exploring with you. If you think of any questions after the fact, once again, feel free to use that number or email down there. We'll be sure to get back to you. But thank you so much, scientists. I had a great time exploring, and have a great rest of your day. See ya.